Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So before I begin today, I just want to let everybody know that there is a link in the description of this video that will lead you to the Indiegogo coming soon page for my graphic novel. And you can sample some of the art that's going to be in the graphic novel there. And you can also leave your email address so that you will be informed when the project goes live. And if you do that, if you leave your email address and then go and buy the book once it is live, you will receive a free pinup poster with your book. And at the same time, I have an open survey over on the community section of this YouTube channel, and it is about what kind of perks I should offer for this Indiegogo campaign that is coming up. So if you want to have some say in what you receive as a perk when you are going to order this book, you can head on over to the survey, which again is on the community section of my YouTube channel. So all of that out of the way, I want to discuss something that was just discussed about a week and a half ago on the YouTube channel of Literature Devil. Now, Literature Devil himself has a morning show. He calls his Morning Nonsense Show, and I have appeared on that show. And we have talked about hero, and he is very much interested in this idea of hero. And this video, he talks about and asks the question, is Superman still relevant? The one that he did about a week and a half ago. And when he did that, he linked it to me and asked me to make some comments on it. And I said to him, look, I can't comment on it here on Twitter. That's just much too restrictive. I'm going to have to do an entire video on it, which is this video right now. So I'm going to link Literature Devil's video about Superman again in the description of this video. It is a little bit long. It's a little over an hour, but it's certainly worth listening to. Especially if you listen to it like I listen to things. Everything I listen to on YouTube, I listen to on twice the speed so that it takes half the time, just because I find that everybody on YouTube talks so painfully slow. But anyways, so the question that Literature Devil proposed and that he asked me to comment on was the question, is Superman still relevant? Now, I would agree with almost everything that Literature Devil says within this video. He's very exhaustive. Every time I had an objection to what he was saying, he actually talks about it later on in the video. But within this video, there's a bit of a gray area. And I think this gray area, which he kind of glosses over a little bit, is the defining area wherein progressive ideologues who have taken over the genres of fantasy and science fiction, not just within comics, but within all of science fiction and fantasy. These progressive ideologues have found this weakness, have found this gray area, and this is what they exploit in order to corrupt stories. But in order to get to that point, first I have to give you a very brief description of what Literature Devil himself gives within his video to answer the question, is Superman still relevant? Now I'm going to do this in my own words rather than his words so that I can cut it down to a minimum time possible. So again, the question is Superman still relevant? So if you ask that question, you are assuming that at one point in time Superman was relevant, but at this point in time he is no longer relevant or is possibly no longer relevant, which indicates there has been a change between previously what was and what is. So the question then becomes, where does this change, if it actually occurs, where does it take place? Well, the automatic way of looking at it would be to look at whether this change takes place within one of the two participators within this question. That is to say, you have number one, the character of Superman, and number two, the audience. So very briefly, he says, number one, if it exists within the character, well, Superman himself has gone through many iterations. If you're looking at Superman the character, he has changed pretty much every 20 years since he started existing in the late 1930s. Therefore, if he is no longer relevant, all you have to do to make him relevant is to bring back that old Superman, or change him to something that is relevant. There's nothing inhibiting that from happening. But since it is a quick fix, it indicates that it is not the thing which is the source of this change. The change, that is, in whether Superman is still relevant. So the question then becomes, is this change something that happened within the audience, and the audience's view, more specifically, their view of what a hero actually is? Now, this is where the gray area enters in. What Literature Devil talks about is the fact that there is a standard for the hero. and this standard exists within the minds of human beings. And he also assumes, although doesn't state this specifically, that human beings are standard. The human beings of today are the same human beings as existed in 1939 when Superman first came out. So you're assuming that human beings are stable, and he's also assuming a standard for the hero itself, and therefore this change cannot occur within the audience because, again, the audience themselves are standard. The idea of a hero is standard. There's no change there. Therefore, if a change has occurred, it's not here. But the point is that this standard that he talks about, he backs up onto the idea of the hero's journey. And he takes that hero's journey, that little wheel that we're probably all familiar with, which describes the hero's journey, and he backs that up onto the ideas of the philosopher known as Carl Jung. Now, Carl Jung would be the philosopher that, if you listen to Jordan Peterson videos, this would be the philosopher that he quotes the most. He talks about archetypes and how these archetypes exist within the collective unconscious of mankind. And so for Literature Devil, he says this archetype exists as a standard, and therefore there is no change there. And he also goes further back from Carl Jung into the ideas of Plato, which I would say that the ideas of Carl Jung are just the ideas of Plato, Plato's idea of the forms, just brought into a more modern context and made subjective rather than objective, because the forms for Carl Jung exist within the collective unconscious of the subject, that is to say, of human beings, rather than in a dimension of the forms that is independent and objective, which they do for Plato. Now, very briefly, what is this idea of forms for Plato? Well, Plato believed that everything that exists in the form that it does because it connects to this ultimate form of the thing within this realm of the forms. So if you're sitting on a chair, the reason why that chair is a chair is because it is connected to the form of a chair that exists within the realm of forms, and therefore, since it participates in this form, it is a chair. And this is for everything. And the highest of the forms is the form of the good. Anything in this world that participates in the good is participating, in Plato's idea, in the form of the good, which exists as the highest form in the realm of the forms. So these forms that exist in their own realm are objective things. And that's really the difference between Plato's idea of the forms and the Jungian idea of archetypes that exist within the collective unconscious, which are therefore subjective. And what Literature Devil talks about is this heroic archetype comes from Plato and his ideas of the allegory of the cave. Now, very briefly, again, what is the allegory of the cave for Plato? If you've never been introduced to it, it's the Matrix. It's the first Matrix movie. That's what the first Matrix movie is based upon. You have people, they are stuck as prisoners in this false reality that is a cave. They don't even know that they are prisoners. All that they see are shadows on a wall, and they believe that to be reality. And only through participating in dialectic and discussing with each other can they begin to free themselves from the chains and see that they are actually prisoners. And then they can work to free themselves more so that they can move around within this cave, within this prison of the Matrix, and see that no, everything here is false. And then they can eventually take themselves outside of this cave, outside of the Matrix, and see things as they actually are. And this outside world of the cave is the realm of the forms, where the person can go around and see things as they actually exist in their true form. Again, all you have to do is think about the Matrix. That's exactly what it is. Now, here's the thing. You have Literature Devil talking about the hero's journey and how this hero's journey comes from the ideas of Carl Jung, how the ideas of Carl Jung come from Plato, how Plato's ideas are expressed in his allegory of the cave. But in this hero's journey, there hits a point where the hero actually has to act to overcome what is standing in his way. But what Literature Devil talks about as the hero overcoming these things and therefore being able to move further on around the circle of a hero's journey is through Aristotelian ideas, through the ideas of Aristotle. Aristotle, who said that you are what you do continuously, or to put it another way, you are your habits. So, as I'm always talking about, if you wish to be a virtuous person, you need to habitually act in a virtuous way in order to be that virtuous person. If you wish to be an expression of heroic virtue, that is to say, if you wish to be a hero, you must continually act in this virtuous, heroic way. And these actions will allow you to move past that point on the hero's circle, on the hero's journey, in order for you to overcome what is actually standing in your way, and you can continue on. But the gray area lies in the fact that even though Aristotle is the student of Plato, Aristotle fundamentally disagrees with Plato about the ideas of the forms. Aristotle takes a lot of what he says from his teacher Plato, but he fundamentally disagrees that the idea of the forms, that the realm of the forms actually exist. And he breaks this idea in pieces logically in the first couple of chapters of the Ethics. So the point being is that Literature Devil takes the ideas of Plato and then brings them forward to Jung and then shows how they are expressed within the hero's journey. But in one key place, he inserts the ideas of Aristotle in order for this hero's journey to continue on. And while it seems like this fits in rather hand in glove with all of the other ideas, really, fundamentally, at its core, it is opposed to the ideas of Plato in a certain way. And if you take the ideas of Plato and his idea of the virtuous man and his idea of the hero, and you grow a hero directly out of that, and you do the same thing for Aristotle and grow your hero directly out of his ideas, which reject the ideas of the form, you get two fundamentally different kinds of heroes. Because to encapsulate in a few sentences what I'm always talking about, the Aristotelian idea of a hero, it is based upon the fact that there is a standard human nature. He agrees to this, so does Plato. But at the same time, Aristotle talks about the virtues wherein a person becomes heroic in the terms of the fact that in order to obtain these virtues to begin with, first of all, you must have right reason. That is to say, reason in accord with reality. And it is this objective existence of reality and man's human nature and how they connect to each other through right reason that allows the person to be a hero. Now, this is only slightly different from what Literature Devil talks about, because Literature Devil talks about a standard, but I'm talking Aristotelian in an objective standard. And again, this is something which produces a very different kind of hero in the following way. Within the Aristotelian way of looking at the virtues, action is something which is necessary. It is something that has to happen for this person to actually be a hero. Because the idea of right reason, which leads into prudence, which leads into justice, which leads into fortitude, which leads into temperance, that temperance then backs up upon right reason once again. And therefore, if the person is intemperate, it destroys his right reason and knocks everything else down like a circle of dominoes. Therefore, in order to be a hero, action is necessary. You necessarily must act in order to be a hero in an Aristotelian way. If you do not act, if those actions do not express themselves within your life, you will then end up becoming intemperate because you are what you do, and that will knock down right reason, and you will no longer be able to be a hero. It simply destroys your ability to be a hero. But within the ideas of Plato, action is not necessary. Now, it is encouraged, but it is not necessary. It doesn't necessarily follow and have to be there. Because, well, here's the thing. You have this idea of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. This person who escapes from the cave, Neo, who escapes from the Matrix. This person doesn't necessarily have to go back down into the cave after he has freed himself and allowed himself to see these forms. Now, Plato does talk about the person should, out of pity, go back into the cave to try to teach these other people, but then he discusses that for a little while and says, well, these people would then try to kill you because they're comfortable in where they are and they don't want to hear these things. They will try to get rid of you. So really what should happen in the ideas of Plato is that you should, if you are an enlightened philosopher and have seen the light of the forms, you can just sit up there in the forms and contemplate these things. But out of pity, if you wish to go back in and try to instruct the people that are within the cave, you become a philosopher king. But you don't try to drag those people out into the light. You simply rule them in an enlightened way. And you have the ability to rule them in an enlightened way because you have superior ideas within your head. And this is the exact point. There is a fundamental difference within the hero of Aristotle and the hero of Plato, because Plato's hero depends primarily on having the right ideas within your head. But those right ideas don't necessarily lead you to the actions of a hero. They don't necessarily lead you there. You don't have to do that. You should do so out of pity, but you don't need to. Whereas Aristotle's hero is prompted to action because it necessarily must be there. And this is the point where progressives come in. These progressive people who have been writing science fiction and fantasy for the last 20, 30 years at the bare minimum. These ideas that emerge from Plato, and especially the drawing of them through the subjective medium that is expressed by Carl Jung, is something that the progressives just glom onto and use for their own means. Now, I'll try briefly to take another example from science fiction and try to explain what I'm talking about. I used to be a very big fan in the 70s, 80s, 90s of Star Trek. I really started to hate it once Enterprise came out, but that's a different story. But when I started to watch Star Trek The Next Generation, I saw a very big change within the captain of the Enterprise. Within Jean-Luc Picard, he expressed more than once the sentiment which is expressed within one line of dialogue within an episode. He is talking to someone about the way that human beings used to exist a couple of 100 years ago, and he says, "We have evolved past that point. We no longer do such things." And I would say that Jean-Luc Picard is the embodiment within science fiction of Plato's philosopher king. But here's the thing. Jean-Luc Picard says we have evolved past this point of needing these things. This is not actually the way that evolution works, but it's the way that progressives over and over again use the word evolution. They use it to mean that we haven't changed bodily in any way. We simply hold better ideas within our head, and therefore we are superior. We have evolved beyond those people who existed in the past. And this would involve a Jungian idea as well, because not only as individuals do these people hold these superior ideas within their head, but there has also been a change within the collective unconscious of the human beings themselves, and this has propelled them to become superior than the people who existed several hundred years ago. Now this plays directly into your progressive ideology, because what progressives do in order to build their ideology, it's all built upon a utopian ideal. It's all built upon an assumption that in the future a utopia will exist, not can exist, but will exist, wherein human beings in this reality will live in a perfect way. They assume this to be absolutely true, even though logically it makes no sense. And they take this assumed truth that this will exist and then move backwards from it in order to construct their argumentation as to what they wish to implement today. And when they do this, they destroy any notion that there is any such thing as a fixed human nature. Because the point is, in their assumption that this utopia will exist, they then move backwards and say, okay, how do we get the people who now exist to fit into this utopia so that it can exist? Because it will eventually happen. We just want to bring it along a little sooner than it would naturally. So the point being that if there was a fixed human nature, a fixed point within every human being, no matter how intelligent you were, no matter when you lived, no matter where you lived, if there was a fixed point of human nature, then any society which is concerned with human beings must be built around that fixed point. But they build this idea in the future of their utopia completely independent of anything like that. And therefore they must assume that the people who exist now and at every point don't have a fixed human nature, because they must be able to be completely malleable in order to make them into what they need to be in order to fit into the society. That is to say, you don't construct the society around the fixed point of the human being and therefore then fit them together. What you do is you construct the society in the way you wish it to be, and therefore have to pound the human being into the shape needed in order to fit into the society, which you absolutely and can completely do, because there's no fixed point within human beings. And how do you do this? Well, you do this by altering the ideas that these people and society hold within their heads. First of all, you do it for these people, individuals. You change their mind into this progressive, superior way of thinking. And then when you get a majority of the society to believe in this way, it becomes part of the collective unconscious. And therefore, the people who don't believe, who aren't superior, those people can be weeded out, and you can be left just with the superior thinking kind of people. And that will be the people that fit into the utopia. And by the way, this is exactly what the people writing comics are trying to do. The vice president of character development and content at Marvel talks about this over and over again. They're trying to change the mind of these individuals so that they can get to the point of it changing society as a whole, where the mass of people, the most people, the majority of people hold these ideas, and then they can change the society itself towards these progressive ideas. But in order to see the real danger of this idea, all we have to do is to look at how it has expressed itself within our history, and just recent history, by the way. So if you believe that when you hold the correct ideas within your head, you become superior to the other people who don't hold those ideas within their heads, well, we can see this expressing itself around us all the time today. You have these progressive people. They say, oh yes, we believe in the rights of others. We want everybody to have these rights. And then in the next breath they say, yeah, but those people over there, that group over there, they do not deserve those rights because they don't hold the correct ideas within their head. And since they are therefore inferior, they do not deserve these rights. They don't deserve the right to speak. We must deplatform them. We must take away their ability to speak freely because they don't hold the correct ideas within their heads. And I want to extend this just for a minute to show you exactly how insidious this kind of thinking is. If you combine this mindset of the progressive and their progressive ideology with something else which is a fundamental point within their progressive ideology, something very scary happens. So, your progressive ideology is basically based upon socialist, communistic, atheistic ideas. And those atheistic ideas assume that, of course, there is no God. Now, the whole point of human beings up until the last couple of hundred years is that we assumed that everybody was created in the image and likeness of God. That image and likeness itself is sacred, and therefore the human life is sacred, and therefore every human being is sacred. But in the communistic, socialistic, atheistic way of looking at things, since there is no God, you have no sacred human nature. And so, over the last 20, 30, 40 years, this has been quietly replaced within medical circles with the term quality of life. It no longer depends upon the sanctity of life, it depends upon the quality of life. This has been happening for some time now, and especially within the higher tiers of medical ethicists, people who work for places like Harvard. So how does this play out? Well, it plays out in the following way. Let's take this completely off the wall example of a worldwide pandemic that actually exists, wherein people need ventilators in order to defeat a virus that has entered into their system. So you have a hospital wherein it is overflowing with patients of this kind. You have 150 people who have this virus and need these ventilators, but you only have 100 ventilators. Who gets these ventilators? Of those 150 people, who gets them and who doesn't? Well, according to the old system, since everybody is considered equal because they all have a sanctity of life, you would take those people and triage them. That is to say, you would take the people who are in the most need of these things, those people who are the most vulnerable, and you would give them the ventilators first because they have the most need for them. And so the older people, the people with pre-existing conditions, the people who don't have the strength to fight this on their own, they would be given first choice whether or not they go on a ventilator. And the people who are young, the people who are strong, they would be put at the end of the list. But if you flip it over and talk about quality of life, that things are dependent upon quality of life, the entire thing flips over. And they say, well, look, these old people, these people with diseases, these people who are the most vulnerable, well, these people don't have as much quality of life as the strong, young people. Therefore, they will be the people who are left out. They will be the 50 people who don't get ventilators because they don't have the same quality of life. And by the way, just as a quick aside, these medical ethicists even take this so far into the fact that since there is no sanctity of life and we are just animals, if you have another animal that has a superior quality of life than you do, and you have, say, only one ventilator, and you have a person who has a poor quality of life and a pig which has a high quality of life, which one of those two is going to get the ventilator? Well, the pig is, because he has a superior quality of life, and you're both just animals. Therefore, the calculation is the higher quality of life goes to the pig, therefore he gets the ventilator, and you as a human being die because you don't have a superior quality of life to that pig. These are arguments that have been making their rounds for 30 years within the higher medical ethicist societies within North America and Europe. Now, let's combine all of that with the idea that you become superior when you have superior progressive ideas within your head. So, if you become a superior person by holding the correct ideas within your head, then you have a higher quality of life. If you have a higher quality of life because you hold these ideas, then if we go back to our example of we have 150 people who need ventilators and only 100 ventilators, the people who believe the progressive ideology, since they are superior and therefore have a higher quality of life, they will be the ones chosen first to be given these ventilators. And you, the person who doesn't hold the correct views, you will be left to die. And that's just the positive way of looking at it. If we flip it over again and look at the negative way that this can be expressed, we see this happening throughout the last 100 years of our history. We have rulers saying, well, look, we have this group of people. They don't have a good quality of life just because of who they are and the kind of ideas that they hold in their head. Therefore, we can put them into labor camps, say, and work them to death because, well, that provides for us who have the superior quality of life. Or let's take this section of our country. We can allow them all to starve to death while the rest of us feast because, of course, we have a superior quality of life. We hold these superior ideas within our head. They are people who have an inferior quality of life. We can just let them die. And so people en masse have been herded into camps. People en masse have been starved to death. People en masse have been treated in a subhuman way because they simply do not hold the correct ideology within their minds. And we can see this playing out over and over again within the last 100 years of history of this planet. So let's bring this back into the realm of story for a minute. Within the older stories, within the stories of Jean-Luc Picard, within the stories of Neo, within the stories of Superman, because as Literature Devil talks about, there's a story like this within Superman, within All-Star Superman. You have Lex Luthor at the end. He has an epiphany because he's allowed to see in the way that Superman sees. That is to say, he becomes something superior, even though he possesses at that point the same powers as Superman and a higher intellect than Superman. He doesn't actually become a hero until he possesses the correct way of looking at things within his mind. So in these previous ways, over the last 20, 30 years, you have these progressive people who are writing these stories, and they insert action into these heroes after they have become enlightened. Not because it's part of their character, not because it would naturally, rationally, logically flow from the character as they are put together. They insert it just as Plato inserted into his Allegory of the Cave the pity that he puts into the heart of the philosopher and makes him go back in to be a philosopher king. And they do that to, again, obscure this little section of the hero's journey, to make it a little bit gray so that they can pass their so-called hero over this point of actually acting and therefore continue on and make him look like a hero. But of course, as I said, he doesn't necessarily have to act. Not like the Aristotelian way of looking at a hero, who necessarily does need to act. But of course, if you accept the Aristotelian way that he necessarily must act, that is something that is fixing a human nature within that human being. It is objective. It will therefore destroy all of this progressive ideology, and therefore they cannot have that. So they have obscured this little part of the hero's journey for a lot of science fiction and fantasy history. But at this point within science fiction and fantasy that we now see today, they have completely gotten rid of it. They assume that they have inserted this idea so many times into the minds of individuals who consume the products of science fiction and fantasy that they now have a critical mass of the people who accept the fact that as long as you hold the correct ideas in your head, that is what makes you a hero. And therefore, they abandon any notion of this gray area. They don't try to hide it anymore. These characters do not act in a heroic way, because they don't need to. All they need to possess in order to be a hero in their minds, in the minds of progressives, is that these characters hold the correct ideology within their own minds. And so you get these characters, especially from Marvel, these characters like the champions. They don't act in any heroic way at all, because they don't need to act in a heroic way in order to be a hero, not according to the progressive. That is, again, exploiting this gray area of the hero's journey, which goes back into Jung, which goes back into Plato, and necessarily emerges from the idea of the forms. no matter whether it be Plato's objective idea of the forms or Jung's subjective idea of archetypes. And I could go on more and more about this dynamic that exists within these heroes. But suffice it to say that these new heroes are patterned after these old heroes, which are heroes simply because they hold the correct ideas within their head. But since they have abandoned any notion of making this gray area fit in, of making these ideas of Aristotle fit in to convince the reader of the lie that they are a hero, these progressive writers have abandoned that tool now. They don't need it anymore, or they feel they don't need it anymore, because they feel that in order for a person to be a hero, all he has to have is the correct idea in his mind. And therefore, he doesn't need to act in a heroic way. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget about clicking on the link so that you can receive your free pinup poster when you order my future graphic novel. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.